I made it through spooky month. Now the blood pressure can drop back down. We can have a deep breath, nice and relaxing, and get to enjoy video games again with no fear and nothing scary.
With the exception, you'll have to wait till Christmas for any new video games.
No!
The Gaming Lovers Podcast with Brendo and Jem. G'day and welcome to episode 81 of the Gaming Lovers Podcast. I'm Jem.
I'm Brendo.
Good to be back.
Did I have to speak it in that tone?
I don't know.
I was just following your lead. We are the gaming lovers, husband and wife, but both video game lovers as well.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I need to say, just after last week's episode with the good brother Steve, I'm sorry, Steve, but you're a bit of a Ross from Friends. Just feel like I needed to get that out there. I know you probably are going to get annoyed at me saying that.
How dare you?
You're the one who said it first.
No, it's the good brother Mr. Steve.
Oh.
How dare you forget the Mr. Steve?
This episode of the Gaming Lovers Podcast, we're going to be looking at console sales throughout history, the ones that have topped the rankings, ones that have broken records, why they have done better than their competitors, and have an in-depth look at that.
Over the 8 or so generations that we've had with our video game consoles over the years, some contests very tight, just 1 or 2 million deciding the victor. As if that's just a small number. But sometimes it is an absolute blowout, and some of the figures are very interesting to analyse. But, as always, we can't just jump straight into business.
No.
It's not all business and no pleasure, because it's time for Gaming Goals!
I had basically like a week off because I was unwell last week. So I had a little bit of time to play the game that many people voted for on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 different PlayStation Vita games that I needed help kind of whittling down. And the winning vote went to Hakuoki Edo Blossoms.
The visual novel.
Mm-hmm. And because the original, like the first one in that series, kind of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, like maybe not cliffhanger per se, but like leaves things very open-ended and doesn't give you the full story. You're like, wait, no, you didn't answer my questions about this.
Which, if the game is a one and done, you definitely do not want no closure like that. But if there is a sequel,
yes,
it certainly keeps the intrigue flowing. With this visual novel, does it have a gimmick or anything? Like you've had other ones where your primary protagonist is cursed and anyone they touch gets poisoned. How can they find romance? Things like that. Is this one have anything like that, or is it just a more straight-laced, no fantasy business?
It is set in the Edo period, like a lot of feudal Japan, and there is history kind of weaved throughout the story, so there is that element of realism, but that's too boring, I guess, for visual novels. And now we've kind of, we're treading on Twilight territory.
Oh, of course. Who would not want to romance Japanese samurai wolf vampire men?
I haven't had any wolfmen, to my knowledge anyway, but a lot of, I guess, vampire-esque kind of, I don't want to say diseases, but like a condition that some of them can get. They call them furies.
Oh. And
it helps them like get stronger in combat, but at the cost of shortening basically their lifespan and having this insatiable bloodlust. So it's interesting. You've got the setting of all these wars going on, and also now the story's starting to move and talk about the political side of foreigners coming into Japan pretty much for the first time.
Which was a big deal.
Huge deal.
Historically for Japan, an island nation.
They had closed their borders to everyone for the longest time. And, you know, you see a lot of the imperial forces wanting to be very traditional, and there were those that wanted to open their borders. So that is kind of this like subtext that's going on, and then there's all this other fluff.
I love games where you can play as like a bear and a bird in fantasy wonderful lands, or out in space in the outer worlds, for example. But there is something that's kind of it hooks me when a game leans into actual historical events and just magnifies them or twists them a little bit, with your blood curse, whatever. It's fine. But there's still that historical accuracy to a degree. And I like that.
Yeah. It's been really well written. It's one of the better visual novels and one that I've always found engaging. So I'm still in my first playthrough. I haven't died yet, so that's good. I haven't got a bad ending, so I think I'm making the right choices. And yeah, once I get through that one, then I'll start using a guide and start fishing my way through, getting all the endings and everything else. So.
But you are enjoying it?
I am enjoying it. I forgot how much I enjoyed the original, so it's kind of been a nice refresher. And at least for the sequel too, it's kind of recapping who each character is when they make their first appearance and reminding me what role they played in the first game. And I haven't played that first game in ages, so it's been really helpful. I'm glad that they did that.
Very cool.
Yeah. What else have you been playing? You've had a very busy gaming week.
Oh boy, have I. We did have a couple of days away where we did visit my mother, my dear old mother.
Yes.
And we enjoyed some Super Mario Party
Yes,
in particular with herself and her partner. Very good fun and game time with the four of us. Some of the cooperative energies were a little tense in some of the 2-on-2 games.
Yes.
Bit of blame being thrown around of whose fault the defeats were. And that's just from me.
Everyone was getting mad at me for winning too much.
Growing up, playing Mario Party with my family has always been some of my favourite, if you'll allow me to get mushy for a second here, Super Mushio Party. One of my favourite gaming time frames, playing Mario Party with the family. Quite often, each weeknight, we would play a round of Mario Party, and we used to love it. Good times, occasionally some people get competitive, but I can't say I'm completely innocent in that when it comes to Mario Party. So getting the chance to play another round of Super Mario Party on the Switch with my mother who lives interstate, it felt like a flashback to days gone by, a little nostalgia wave hitting me. However, my mother also seemed to really enjoy two of the other Switch games we have, Heave Ho, a cooperative puzzle physics frustration simulator, and Death Squared, which I did not think would be a sort of game that a casual gamer would enjoy so much.
He got really into that, both your mum and her partner. Played that for at least an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though they were getting so frustrated at each other, it was very funny to watch. And there's always this one level that all of our friends seem to get stuck on. It's the most basic of levels. It is like a long rectangle level where one of the bases you have to reach is in the middle and the other one is on the end.
Yep.
And the laser that can destroy one of them is rotating kind of in circles as I think it's the blue square moves.
Yep.
And it's so simple but so frustrating and it's hilarious. I think we uploaded a video a while back of your sister and your dad playing that same level and getting really stuck on it.
It's so fun.
And that's the one they got stuck on too. Isn't that so funny?
I was in hysterics. I have actually secretly filmed them trying that for many attempts. So maybe I'll sneak another little video of that up there. But that was just good to play some party games, some casual gaming with family, with my wife, with my mother. Great times just in that little casual holiday. However, the flight's there and back. I've mentioned many times before, if there's a flight that I have to catch, the very first thing I pack, the literal very first thing, underwear be darned. Forget underwear. What am I bringing to play on the plane? And this time around, good old reliable PS Vita got the nod. I have been playing Ys, Memories of Celceta. It has been a enjoyable, somewhat simplistic JRPG. It's a remake of a much older game, but it has a lovely coat of paint. It has beautiful, bright graphics. It has an enjoyable combat system, and I thought it was going to be light on story, but I'm starting to get deep enough in that I'm getting some good story nuggets too, which is always nice to keep the momentum up. Overall, you're trying to map the great mysterious forest, and you get a percentage on your map of how much of the forest you have mapped out. You get rewards based off certain percentages. I've got about 45% complete at the moment, trying to find our way to the primeval lands. It is quite good for me to play on my handheld.
Nice.
Now, apart from that, I have also been a very busy beaver because I had Spooky Month obligations to complete. Unfortunately, I did not get around to Alone in the Dark on MS-DOS, but maybe Halloween next year. Maybe 4 in Feb 2020. We'll wait and see.
Oh, there you go. My 4 and Feb can be MS-DOS games. Nice and short.
You can beat in like 40 seconds. However, Spooky Month demanded Resident Evil 7. Finally, guys, I did it. It came out a couple of years ago. I mentioned last year that I was too darn chicken to play it. I have finally played through its entirety, and it was excellent, scary, enjoyable, unenjoyable, all at the same time.
Pretty much everything you expect from a horror game.
Pretty much. It ticked all the boxes. It had jump scares. It had high tension. It had great atmosphere. Playing that with surround sound headphones may be the smartest or dumbest thing I've ever done because it felt so darn real. It is a game you can play on PSVR, and that would be horrific. I still do intend on reviewing some PSVR horror games with my good buddy the Falcon, but our schedules have not been aligning well, so that has been put on hold for now. But Resident Evil 7, a series that I love so much, and this one is such a departure, I wasn't sure if I would enjoy it as a first-person game. Resident Evil 2 Remake that I played earlier this year, I think that style, that camera, that puzzles, map layout, everything like that, a lot of it carries over, but something about having that external viewpoint where you can run a bit faster than you can in 7 in particular. I like to be mobile in these games, and 7 felt like I was speed walking at best. So that took away a bit of the enjoyment when you're trying to evade monsters in a first-person view as well. You want to have the freedom of movement and see where everything is. But I still really enjoyed it. But classic Resident Evil, I think, is what I want in the future. Resident Evil 8, and I will emphasize Resident Evil because I re-listened to some of my good brother, Mr. Steve, and because we are Australian and we are lazy, it just becomes Resident Evil. Resident Evil. 4 syllables. Resident Evil.
Or Resi.
Or Resi. But, yeah, I can tick that box. It's done. It's complete. It's all on my YouTube channel. If you watch it, you may be frustrated at my slow progress because I was going blind. No hints, no advice, nothing. I got the good ending, by the way.
Oh, nice.
There's only one real major choice that affects it. And to be honest, you'd be a bit of a jerk if you aimed for the bad ending because it just logically doesn't make sense. But I still had some trouble deciding what to do. Maybe I'm a jerk at heart. Who knows? But Resident Evil 7 is great, and I am glad that I finally got the courage to play it. And speaking of story nuggets, that game had more story than I expected. Being such a wild departure from the series, graphically, setting, location, I didn't know if this was even going to tie in with the greater Raccoon City Umbrella Corporation, T-Virus, etc. storyline. Jill sandwiches. Are there Jill sandwiches served in Louisiana? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but now I do.
If it's in Louisiana, it would have some fried chicken in there.
So yes, now the problem is, right, because I'm me, I took a big step in playing Resident Evil 7 without playing 6. 6 is apparently terrible. But now it's the only mainline Resident Evil game I haven't played. So maybe, just maybe, Resident Evil 6 will get a run sometime soon. Maybe that's a 4 in Feb game. Just to clear that backlog, do it, get it out of the way. I've played them all. But Resident Evil 7 I liked. Yeah. Now, a game that I only just started this week, unexpectedly, it came out on the Xbox Game Pass. I thought, I've heard good things about this. I downloaded it. I started playing it. I couldn't stop playing it, and I beat it all in a week. And it is called Minute. And it's just spelt as you would expect Minute to be spelt, but without an E. It's 5 letters. M-I-N-I-T. Do you know what Minute is about?
I saw you play part of it. And I know you're limited to like a minute of time to do what you can, and then the game ends, and then you start over.
Yep.
But I don't know what the plot is.
Well, the plot is you're just a little duck creature man. The graphics aren't very detailed in this game. It is black and white. The entire game's black and white. Like the old school Legend of Zelda games from the Super Nintendo era, looking down in the grid-based maps, and if you go off the screen, you go to the next screen. And graphically, it's very pixely, but it's charming, and the characters speak in little burbly sound bites, like Banjo-Kazooie style, which is always a tick. Yep, exactly. And there's one very frustrating old man who speaks one block of text at a time. And like you said, you have 60 seconds to do something. Hopefully do something, and your progress is basically saved. Mm-hmm. So you'll have all these individual little puzzles or obstacles, and you unlock more items, Zelda style. You start your adventure by picking up a sword, but it's cursed, and that's what gives you the 60-second time limit for each loop. And
so if you don't touch the sword, you're fine?
If you don't touch the sword, you can't get out of the starting area.
Oh.
Because you can't chop down the bushes, for example. But then later on, you can get a watering can, and you can get a this and a that, and you can get boots that can make you faster, and you can get all these different types of items that can help accelerate your progress. You unlock shortcuts, you unlock extra assistance from creatures that are around you. All these little things that you're like, all right, time started. Let's go. I'm going to go north. I'm going to go north again, and I'm going to. Oh, there's something I can do here. Quickly, what do you want? What? Tell me what you want, person. Okay, I'll kill the snakes near you so you can be free. Excellent. I did something, and time's up. All right, what else can I do in this next run? And part of it is just experimenting. And the best part is, if you achieve nothing, all you've lost is a literal minute of your day, and in that sense, you can play it. If you have 5 minutes to play games while your wife's getting ready, while we're about to go out to dinner, I could play 5 minutes of Minute. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. I greatly enjoyed it, and I can honestly say I did all the entire game, well, beating the main boss. I didn't do everything the game had to offer, but I did it all. I ticked the box. I got the achievement for beating the game, and I used absolutely no guides. And for something that is a puzzle game like this, that I got stuck repeatedly at roadblocks that I didn't think I could get around, and then I accidentally leant on something and the wall moved, and I'm like, oh, I found a thing. I'm so smart. And it was just by dumb luck, but let's just pretend I'm smart, please. I feel proud that I did that game with no hints and nothing. Nothing. So
well done.
Thank you. Look, honest praise. That's all I was after, was a bit of praise.
Fishing for a bit of a compliment there.
I greatly enjoyed it. Even if you don't think that art style is your jam, give Minute a try, especially if you have the Xbox Game Pass. It's available on so many different things. You can get it on your mobile phones as well. It would be a great time waster if you're waiting for a train, if you're waiting at an airport. Minute gets Brendo's big rubber stamp of thumbs upness.
Speaking of the Xbox Pass,
Yes.
Game Pass, there's something else you got to play for free because of that. Well, free with a little asterisk there.
That's right. You and I haven't actually talked about the wonderful new first-person RPG from Obsidian, The Outer Worlds.
Yeah, I've seen you play bits, and I have deliberately kept away because I didn't want to spoil it, because eventually I will get around to it myself.
Yep. No doubt you will.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to playing it, just trying to find the right time to sink it, because if I'm going to start it, especially with an RPG, I need a couple of hours just to kind of create my character.
As enjoyable as it was going to visit my mother for a few days, tearing myself away from The Outer Worlds for 3 days was agonizing. I have to admit, like you said, it's a game that you just want to make that butt dint in the couch and you're not moving. And this game keeps ticking boxes as far as my interests and what I wanted from something made by a developer like Obsidian, like BioWare, like Bethesda. But those latter two keep sort of dropping the ball recently. And I said this on last week's podcast, but you weren't there, so I didn't have anyone to really bounce it off because the good brother had no idea what I was talking about. But Obsidian, they've been making serviceable sequels and spin-offs that are in some ways superior to the original products of their series, and in some ways buggy, glitchy messes.
Probably because they're working on a very tight deadline, though, too.
A lot of the times, that is very true. Fallout New Vegas had to be made very quickly.
Yeah.
Knights of the Old Republic 2, the same. But now, I didn't expect Obsidian to make a game so good, and I feel bad for doubting them, but oh my goodness, I have been enjoying this. The dialogue options you get are so varied that sometimes I don't know what to choose when it comes to which one of these should I pick. I like them all. They're so fun. I found a man who has a moon mask on his head and he's miserable at his job, but he has to keep saying these things to sell the items at the shop he's at, and you can keep hassling him about things to the point where he breaks down in depression. Oh, there's nothing better than making someone fall depressed. In a video game, of course. But he gave me good deals at the trading that we were doing, so it's okay.
Okay.
Dialogue options, if you want to emphasize persuade skills, lying, intimidating, we've got it. If you want to hack and be an engineer, you've got it. If you want to just be a brute with melee attacks and nothing else, you got it. If you deliberately make yourself dumb and do not points input intelligence, you speak like Brendo just did then. How good is that?
I remember reading an article recently that said if you want to have a really short game, to play as dumb as possible. Like, that sounds really fun. I probably wouldn't do that for my first, canonical playthrough.
Nope.
But for a second run, doing a dumb run would be pretty funny.
I can't remember what it was exactly. It might have been Neverwinter Nights 2, which I think they made. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that. Something Neverwinter Nights-ish. Might have even been one of the expansion packs. But in that, if you made your character super dumb, he basically spoke caveman speak. And everyone else gets frustrated at you. All the NPCs get frustrated because your dialogue options are literally just like one word. But there's a dumb character in the game that if you are intelligent, he sounds like a caveman. But when you walk up to him and talk to him as caveman speak, and he speaks to you in caveman speak, it's eloquent and expounded language because you're both understanding each other. And that is hilarious.
That's so good. Layers. I believe Fallout New Vegas, which they did, had the option for being dumb as well.
Yes.
And just having really funny conversations because of that. So it seems to be a trend of theirs, a little watermark of Obsidian to allow you to be dumb.
I've been enjoying The Outer Worlds quite a bit. It's a very long game, so it's probably going to be my primary gaming goal for quite a while. I love the fact that you can planet hop in this game. I've always liked that since Knights of the Old Republic and even Mass Effect, where you can go between different planets. I like it. I like The Outer Worlds. More details on that next week.
Now, one game that obviously we haven't had the chance to play yet, but I think is kind of on our radar, and I wanted to touch on it before we jump to our main topic, is Death Stranding.
Death Stranding. The review embargoes have been lifted.
And boy, howdy, are they interesting.
It's very interesting. Nobody quite understands what makes Death Stranding so good. And quite often you'll hear so many negatives about the game, and then the review score will be like a high 80.
Yeah.
And you're like, hang on, what? I thought you didn't like it.
It's been interesting to see the reviews broken down by countries.
Yeah.
Across Europe, it's getting very high praise, and across Asia. America, though, not so much.
They don't want to make America connected again.
It's getting kind of like 7s and 6s in the States. Not all sides, but Yeah.
The big indicator of that is the different branches of IGN
Yes.
worldwide, where, Portugal, 9.1, Spain, 9.6, this country, 9 point something. US IGN gave it a 6.8, which, for the record, somebody pointed out on Twitter, is less than Sonic Forces.
By like a tenth of a point.
Doesn't matter. They're saying quality-wise, Sonic Forces is better than Death Stranding.
Which is, no offense, my love, rubbish.
No, I agree. There's no offense needed. I was not offended. Death Stranding's going to be one of those games that I am ever so interested to play. A, because I appreciate the director's work, previous work, which is always an indicator of if I want to pursue their next project.
And you can definitely see shadows of that in this. Like his style, even from the font text used to the way that you approach combat, there is definitely elements of, Metal Gear in there for sure. So I think if you're good at those games, a lot of that will translate over, but it's going to still have a very different feel because you're ultimately a delivery boy.
Pizza Hut Delivery Boy Simulator 2019. Secondly, I'm very interested in this game because I like the entire video game industry. And not everything has to be a run-and-gun first-person shooter or an established franchise having its next 8th sequel. But this is something different. And yet it is a interesting story as well. There's so many different little things that I'm like, oh, I really want to play it. But apparently that's like 80-something hours long as well. And the final reason I want to play is because you get to make urine grenades. And I mean, seriously, that is what has been missing in my life.
Oh, my word.
No? Not for you?
Oh, no. One thing that caught my attention was the fact that there are very long cutscenes in this, and I believe the final cutscene, which you don't have any input into either, is like a legit movie, 2-hour-long cutscene right at the end. So buckle up for that. Make sure you got your popcorn. Make sure you go to the bathroom before you play.
Knowing my luck, I'd probably trigger that just before I have to go to work in like an hour and a half from when I do it.
So I think you need to dedicate a few hours per session.
When's my next annual leave? I'll start the end game of Death Stranding by then. Yeah, I haven't looked too deeply into reviews because it's the exact sort of game that I already know that I want to play, and so I want as few details as possible. And it's got my attention. We'll put it that way.
For me, I'm excited that he's kind of tackling the need for human connection. The basis of the story of facing human extinction to a degree, of trying to connect people that are broken and that are dealing with some really heavy issues. And that's scratching the surface of the game. There's obviously a lot more to it, and there will be a lot of somewhat convoluted ways of getting that message across, but I think it's still a really poignant and timely message in our world of, we're so connected online, but yet we're so disconnected in a way.
Yeah. That's super deep. Super deep. And only Hideo Kojima could couple that with Conan O'Brien giving you an otter hat. Is that right?
There's so many cameos in this, I think you could turn it into a drinking game.
Forget Smash Brothers. Everyone is in Death Stranding.
All of his gaming buddies. So anyways, looking forward to finally seeing that final product for ourselves. But until then, I think it's time for us to jump into our main topic as we look at console sales over the years right after this.
You're listening to the Gaming Lovers Podcast. Want to join the conversation? Visit thegaminglovers.com. Record your comment or question by clicking on the button on the right-hand side, and you could be featured in the next podcast.
This week, the PlayStation 4 has moved its way up to number 2 on the list of all-time selling home consoles.
That's
so
right.
Not the portables, but like home consoles. Pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, Sony and Nintendo in particular have been having an arms race in recent decade where they have been competing for top spot. Microsoft are doing well as well nowadays, but certainly hamstrung by the lack of popularity in Japan.
Yeah.
But there's been some interesting wars over the years because console warfare is not a thing that we are a stranger to.
No, and it might become a thing of the past as things like Stadia come up. You know, they might become extinct.
I've been having a look this week at the different generations of consoles. Which ones excelled, which ones struggled, which times did new technology sell really well, and which times did new technology lead to a console's demise.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different interesting statistics over the generations of video game sales.
Yeah.
The consoles themselves are a required part of the experience. And as such, the higher install base that buys your consoles, the more market share you get, and as we see through the generations, the more momentum you can build as well, as Sony has definitely done since their debut console.
So where would you like to start?
Well, if you don't mind, we'll just take a quick snapshot at some of the earlier generations.
Okay.
The very first generation of consoles didn't sell very well at all. You had things like the Magnavox Odyssey and the ColecoVision, or whatever it's called. Things that didn't sell well. They were sort of experimental technology at the time.
Yeah.
But then where things really start to pick up is in the second generation of consoles, when the Atari 2600, in its lifetime, 30 million units sold. Now, that was mainly because the Atari 2600 capitalized on the golden age of arcade machines' popularity. And so things like Pac-Man or Asteroids or Centipede could all be put directly onto the Atari 2600.
Yeah.
And it dominated anything that came anywhere near it. The second place, for reference, to its 30 million was the Intellivision, 3 million. 1/10 of the sales that the Atari did. And you smiled at Intellivision.
Because you say these names and I'm like, what?
Well, you remember when we went to Super Potato?
Yeah.
There were consoles there that I didn't even know existed.
You're like, what? I didn't know this was a thing. That happens sometimes at like E3 and other gaming expos where these obscure, almost indie-esque console makers will come out of the woodworks with their little stalls.
Yep.
And you're like, they look so chump and fake.
Now, Atari also made a second console in that generation called the Atari 5200, which sold about 1 million units. Not the most successful. Now, the reason that is, here's your little history lesson. Did you know the whole video game industry almost ended in like 1983? Completely. Sales were down between 83 and 84 by about 97% because the market had been flooded with cheap, bad, terrible games that had been hyped up like E.T., the infamously bad E.T. Now, thankfully, in Japan, a little company that made card games called Nintendo had dabbled in some electronic stuff here and there, but they hit their stride in the third generation when the Nintendo Entertainment System,
The NES.
also known as the Famicom, led the charge of the third generation to sell 61.9 million units.
Nice.
They dominated the world, and a little company called Sega
Sega.
they wanted in on the action. And that 61 million that Nintendo had, well, guess what the Sega Master System had? Oh, it was 13 million. Oh, hang on. It wasn't as good, admittedly. It was not as popular in North America and Japan, the two biggest industry consumers at the time of video games. However, in PAL countries, the Sega Master System did very, very well, sometimes even outselling the NES. So that's probably why I grew up with a Sega Master System and why it is so near and dear to my heart, because I was a loyal PAL gamer. Now, one of the more interesting things is that in Brazil, of all places, Sega took the gaming industry by the throat because for so long, due to import rules and what was allowed and what was not allowed to knock out piracy, etc., etc., Sega Master System was one of the only consoles that was allowed to be sold in Brazil, to the point that a generation later, the Master System still ran basically unopposed in Brazil. So I'm sure that most of the 13 million sales that they made were just in Brazil. Atari did take another bite at the cherry with the Atari 7800.
Yep.
3 million for that one. So we're starting to see Atari have lost their luster. It is sad when you see a company, it may just be because I'm a Sega fanboy at heart, take a charge and do so well and then just go, failure, failure, failure.
Yeah.
We will definitely see that as time goes on. You didn't have any of those consoles, did you?
No, none of those.
And I only had the Sega Master System for that era. The fourth generation's where things really start to heat up because, interestingly enough, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES, the Super Famicom, doesn't sell as well as the NES did. 49 million units sold for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And Sega, in response, charge ahead, particularly in America, with success after success. 30.7 million. Not quite equal, but the console war was a lot more, there was a lot more parity than there was in the NES days.
Yeah.
That NES had the Mario franchise. It had the Zelda franchise. It had Metroid. It had all these groundbreaking things that Nintendo still lean on for sales.
Yep.
Their first party stuff has almost been unrivaled, I would have to say, over the entire history of gaming.
Yeah. And it's an interesting time to look at that because in America, as you've said many times, Sonic was a more recognizable character than Mickey Mouse.
Yep.
Because it was booming.
90s was all about attitude. It was the attitude era. And Nintendo were happy to market for younger children. But Sega, if you wanted to be cool, if you wore your hat backwards, or even just one day aspired to wear your hat backwards in the 90s, you wanted to be affiliated with Sega. For that fourth generation of consoles, the third place goes to the PC Engine TurboGrafx 16, which you nod along and say yes, but even I don't really even know what that is. I did see some stuff for it in Super Potato in Akihabara, but that came in at a whopping 5.8 million. Nowhere near. It was a two-horse race, and we knew that. Now, what we really want to focus on is from here onwards. That was like the introduction.
Yeah.
Thank you for the history lesson, Mr. Brendo, Professor Brendo. But interestingly, Nintendo, with their Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES, they weren't quite happy with the changing of technology. And so they wanted to partner with another company to make a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo.
Sony.
But
Nintendo went, and then Sony went, well, you too. And thus PlayStation was born.
Thus PlayStation was born. One of the things that led to Sega's demise is that they kept wanting to adapt the new technology, the faster technology, the better graphics. And so the Mega CD add-on was actually released for the Mega Drive. And Nintendo saw that and probably thought, ooh, there's the future. Disc-based. We've got these compact discs now. And then the Sega Mega CD sold 2 million units. And Nintendo probably said, okay, we're going to cool our jets on this. Sorry, Sony, we're going to cancel the agreement we have.
I bet they really regret that now.
Now, before we get into Sony arriving on the scene in full, check out these statistics for the 1989 to 1991 releases of handheld video game units. You had one of these. I had one of these. Which one is which? One of these things is not like the other. You have Nintendo, Sega, and Atari making their charge into the handheld world. The Atari Lynx, okay, it sold 3 million units. I had one of those.
Did not have one of those.
And it was a big, bulky little son of a gun. Imagine holding like 2 smartphones end to end. Was pretty much the size of the Atari Lynx. It had full color graphics. It had incredible multiplayer abilities. You could hook up 16 units. Good luck finding 15 other people who had an Atari Lynx, mind you. Now, that was at 3 million units. The Sega Game Gear, that's what I wanted so bad. It was basically on par, power-wise, a little weaker, but better graphics, better colour, I should say, than the Sega Master System. But most importantly, you could get a TV tuner to slot in the top with a little aerial hanging out of your handheld console, and you could watch television on it. The future is here. You can watch television on your mobile device. Sega leading the charge, doing it badly and suffering the consequences for it. 10 million units for the Sega Game Gear. Nintendo were first out of the gates out of these 3 with a little thing called the Game Boy. Never heard of that. Have you heard of that one?
Yes. Still have all my old Game Boys, the original grey brick, and then my Game Boy Color. It's purple, by the way.
Okay. Well, thanks to things like Tetris, which was launching alongside the Game Boy, the original brick with the green and black graphics, forget your full colour. Who needs full colour when you have 118.8 million people? 118 million. Yep. Sega, second place, 10 million. Good golly, Miss Molly.
It had a pretty good catalogue. I think that always will make a difference with video games is the releases, especially exclusive releases, as we've seen with PlayStation over the years.
Yeah.
That can make a huge difference in sales. And you had Pokemon Red and Blue. Hello.
The fact that became one of the highest selling games at that point in time as well
Yes.
probably helped.
You got
helped.
The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, Super Mario Land, and Tetris, one of the most iconic video games of all time.
Now, I'm not all about the graphics, right? But those full colour displays on the Game Gear and the Lynx made the Game Boy look like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
But that came at a cost because your battery life was drastically reduced by those full colour displays.
Mm-hmm.
The Game Boy, I'm pretty sure, could last for like 30 hours on a pair of batteries, whereas the other units, you'd be lucky to get 6. So that's probably another factor of why it did so well.
And I think because it was a portable gaming device, you're a bit more forgiving of lower graphics.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't bother me in the slightest, especially playing games like Tetris, where colours are nice but not necessary.
Yeah. Well, now let's just make sure that you understand that you are part of the problem here because Nintendo, when they release a handheld or even a console, they're not happy with just releasing that unit because the Game Boy had the Game Boy, but it also had the Game Boy Pocket.
Yes.
And it also had the Game Boy Color, which are all counted as the same device for sales. So how many of those did you have?
2.
2. So that's probably a reason why it is so high, is because Nintendo constantly feel the need to, here's the slim version, here's the new version, here's this version. It has a handle.
And you had like Game Boy Advanced and certain games that would work on the Advance but not on the older consoles. But if you had the newer ones, you could play the old ones and the new ones, kind of like backwards compatibility essentially.
Yep.
So you always had the need to upgrade. See, look, that was ingrained in us from such a young age. No wonder we're buying new phones every year.
No wonder indeed. Now, from the 5th generation of home consoles, Nintendo came along with the Nintendo 64, graphically so darn powerful compared to its direct rivals. The Sega team were waving the flag of the Saturn. There wasn't many of them, unfortunately.
How many?
Sega had started to burn out its cheerleaders. 9 million units sold for the Sega Saturn, which, to be honest, is more than I expected. It was surprise launched, which was their greatest mistake ever. At a very early E3, Sega said, here's the Sega Saturn, and it's out now. And everyone's like, well, we haven't saved money for this. We can't afford this console. Look how expensive it is. And Sega really dropped the ball on that one. So 9 million for the Sega Saturn. Nintendo 64
So many incredible games from GoldenEye. You had Mario Kart, Super Mario, which 64, which I think is still a lot of people's favorite.
Yep.
I loved Yoshi's Story.
I bet you did.
Then you had Mario Party enter the scene and all those iterations that came from there. Pokemon Snap. I mean, can you go past that game? I think not. I think not. Been a while since I've gone to that well.
So the Nintendo 64 had the power, it had the library, and it had the more expensive price tags per game. Because
Yes.
cartridges, which Nintendo refused to move on to the CD side of things, like everyone else had been, did end up biting them in the butt.
But all my cartridges still work.
That's very true.
So they do have longevity. If you looked after that, like all our controllers and things still work fine. You can't always say the same for other consoles that are just as old.
Yep.
So they were a good investment, I think. At the time, definitely, some of those games cost just as much as games do cost brand new now.
Yeah.
So
Now, interestingly enough, we've mentioned before that Nintendo often have the weaker console, but it sells so much better regardless. This is the one time where they were more powerful than their direct opponent, graphically, grunt-wise. But the Sony PlayStation, just to remind you, Sega Saturn, 9 million.
mm-hmm.
Nintendo 64, 32.9. Sony PlayStation, 102 million. Disc-based, cheap, and very easily piratable. May have been a factor in why the console itself sold so well.
It really set the stage for that new era of gaming, though. It was slimlined. The controller was very ergonomic, especially compared to the Nintendo 64 controller, which as a kid did not bother me. If I go back and play it now with slightly bigger hands, it's a little more uncomfortable.
Yep.
So they changed the gaming industry. They changed the game.
They changed the game, they changed the games as well, because although it had less power and more blockier graphics generally than the 64, the Sony PlayStation, probably more than any other console, set the prototype of what a modern video game experience is, as far as things like voice acting.
Yep.
And you could have music streaming from the CD, so you had like high quality audio in both voice and music. And also, once they released the Dual Shock controller to combat the Nintendo 64's Rumble Pack,
Heavy beast.
every video game controller basically since then had Rumble from this generation onwards.
Yep. I think also having video games that were marketed at a slightly older audience was a big deal. Nintendo has been for the longest time, and maybe only until recent years, been very family friendly. And PlayStation was kind of like the counter to that. So for those who were older, from teen years and up, that wanted something a bit more mature, whether it just be the type of gameplay or the stories that were told, it allowed them to enjoy gaming and make it feel like it's not just something that's just for kids.
Yeah.
So I think that was a huge part of why they were so successful.
Now, just before we move on to the next generation with PlayStation 2 and so on, Sega were not done yet. The Saturn may have failed, but we have other planets to draw from. And so they decided to release the Dreamcast a few years later again, with far more powerful than anything else on the market. You bring your PlayStation, it crushes it to dust. You bring your 64, those graphics are fuzzy. We want high definition graphics. The Sega Dreamcast was here to dominate. It sold 9 million units because it was expensive and they broke the release schedule by a few years, so nobody had money to buy a Dreamcast. None of the developers had the need to make fancy pants graphic games when they could just make a cheap game on the PlayStation and it would sell millions of copies. There was an existing install base. Why waste your time making a game for a new console when you can make one for the 102 million people that have a PlayStation?
Yeah. The Dreamcast had it been managed a little better, could have been another game changer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little sad when you hear those stories and you're kind of like, well, timing is a big deal, I think, as far as how you launch stuff. Nintendo's made that flub with the Wii U.
Yeah.
Hopefully other companies can learn from those mistakes.
Well, that was it. That was Sega's last attempt at penetrating the console market with the Dreamcast. It had online capabilities. It had a game where you could talk to a fish man. It had everything that gaming needed, but just was not ready for yet. And that includes a screen on a controller, an indicator on a controller, which has made a resurgence in recent years.
It has. We're finally ready for this technology. Sega seems to have come up with a lot of really innovative ideas that are used now and have been perfected. But they tried it and kind of fell on their face a little bit, unfortunately, because it was mishandled. So you kind of got to give them credit at least for being pioneers.
Mm-hmm. That's sort of like the Sonic the Hedgehog games. To most people, they think they're garbage. You just need the higher intellect to actually see them for the art that they are.
Well, I'm going to give you some more time to think of excuses of how to defend Sonic. While we take a quick break and we'll be back with the top-selling consoles of all time.
Share the love. Follow us on Twitter at Brendo Jem. That's BRENDOJEM.
Well, look, all I'm saying is the facts are there. Sonic Forces rates higher than Death Stranding, according to IGN. So, what is art anyway? Sonic the Hedgehog is art.
Low art.
Yes, fine. Okay. Let's move on to the 6th generation of consoles, where if Sony came out of the gates so much faster and stronger than anyone could have possibly predicted, the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, Microsoft's debut,
Yes.
and the Nintendo GameCube, this was even more of a whitewash.
Yes.
Because while the Xbox for Microsoft's debut console got 24 million units sold.
Did decent in Western countries, not so well in Japan.
Powered by such the success and hype of the first launch title, Halo.
Yes.
Which carried that console in the early years,
Definitely.
and rightfully so. The Nintendo GameCube, which came a few years later, only made 21 million sales. These are averaged out just because I don't think we have to sit through 8 decimal places. I think this is a bit easier. But the PlayStation 2, compared to the 24 for the Xbox and the 21 for the GameCube, sold over 155 million units, making it the #1 selling home console, portable console, any console. 155 million plus, because somehow they're still selling.
They are. They're still around. I wonder if it's just like older models just getting resold, and does that count?
Possibly.
For me, I always link PlayStation 2 with SingStar and Guitar Hero. It was kind of that era of party games, made a big resurgence. But it was also dabbling in being, that home entertainment system. It's not just for gaming, it is for other stuff too, and it could play DVDs. And so you didn't then need a DVD player. You could have one thing that did everything, and that has been, I think, a big selling point from then onwards. Every single gaming console has had to have that multifaceted side to it.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays it's more about streaming and can you watch Netflix on your home console? Yes, maybe you can.
Can you play 4K Blu-rays? Things like that have become, decision-making factors between when you've got two very close and identical kind of gaming consoles that offer very similar stats. Sometimes it's those little things that can make you buy one over the other.
Yep.
Especially when they're close in price, and so many games are on both. PlayStation, though, have always had a very solid lineup of exclusives.
Yeah. The library of the PlayStation 2 is filled with classics. I mean, it is where you get the high-quality blockbuster graphics, titles, performances. This is where gaming was starting to really come alive.
That said, I will say this for Xbox. It did have Knights of the Old Republic.
That's right. The Xbox was arguably easier to code for than the PlayStation, which is why a lot of games that they only thought would ever come out on PC made it to Microsoft consoles. Obviously, the link's there with Microsoft, more so than the Sony ones.
Yeah.
And Nintendo were just doing their own thing as usual with tiny little discs that didn't fit into anything else, but they still had their first-party titles like Pikmin and Super Mario Sunshine and a Zelda game that was not enjoyed by me, but enjoyed by some people. Thank you, Twilight Princess. But overall, Sony just demolished its opposition for the second generation running.
Yeah.
And it's probably a reason why, even now with the PlayStation 4, it is absolutely killing it sales-wise.
And so many iterations of the PlayStation 2 came out. It was the PlayStation Slim and all these other versions of it. So that way, if someone missed out on the original or they wanted more storage space, they just had to wait for that next iteration. And that's all kind of counted as the same console, essentially.
Well, I do have both. So this is my turn to double dip in the consoles now. But I will always have a soft spot for the Fat Boy PS2. I like my consoles thick. Before we get to the next generation of consoles, Nintendo did release in 2001 the Game Boy Advance, which sold a whopping 81.5 million units. So that still did the job as far as projecting more of that handheld dominance for Nintendo. Nobody can touch them in the handheld market.
Sadly. Poor Vita.
We'll get to the Vita.
Oh. That said, though, that was one of the few Game Boys I didn't get. I kind of missed that generation. When the DS came out, jumped on board that. Well, you jumped on board that for me.
Yeah, I bought 2 of them as well. One of them for you as a gift.
Yes.
Before we even started dating.
No.
That is how you plant the seed of a future relationship.
But yeah, I remember seeing them just everywhere. All the kids at church. Just as soon as the message is done, all the Game Boy Advances come out of their pockets.
I borrowed one from a friend once because I didn't have it myself. And it wasn't backlit. So if you were trying to play that at night time, you needed like an old school torch because we didn't even have mobile
like
phones with torches on them before. We had to get
a booklight?
I had to smuggle the torch from the kitchen because everyone carries a torch nowadays because it's on your phone. We didn't have that growing up. What happens if the light's power went out? You had to fumble around and try to find a candle or something like a caveman. Oh, goodness me. 7th generation consoles, the PlayStation 3, 87 million units, defeating barely the Microsoft Xbox 360 at 84.7 million. Very, very close between those two. However, both were dwarfed by the Nintendo Wii, which sold over 100 million. 101.6 million Nintendo Wiis made it out there.
Not surprising at all. That was huge. That was revolutionary with the motion remotes, the Wii remotes. I just remember seeing that in the shops and just it caught everyone's attention. And the fact that it was kind of trying to promote gaming that was active, I think made a lot of mums very happy.
Why play tennis in the backyard when you can play tennis in the living room and probably smash a vase or a TV or something else? Put your brother in the
amount of times you saw like videos of people accidentally smashing their TVs because they haven't put like this wrist strap on. It was pretty funny. But I think another thing that was really important for that doing so well, especially upon launch, was Wii Sports being free and part of that bundle as soon as you bought it. And I wish that the Switch had done that. I'm kind of annoyed that they didn't have a free game that comes with it because it was kind of like an expensive, I don't know.
It was a great way to promote the gimmick of the motion controls and why there's so much shovelware on the Wii that just sort of forces in motion waggle, which I always hated. If it's used correctly, the motion control aspect of this was also technically part of the PS3's 6-axis controller, but it certainly paved the way for anything motion-related in a console. Now, interestingly, this is the first generation where all 3 direct competitors absolutely smashed previous like combined sales.
Yeah.
Because although the last couple of years Sony did better with the previous two consoles, this one was a bit of a dip for them.
Yeah.
The lowest out of the three is 84 million for the 360.
Yeah, it was a good year for gaming.
Microsoft in particular, they led the charge of true online gaming on the original Xbox with Xbox Live.
Mm-hmm.
They were the premier #1 online service in this era.
Yeah, Xbox Live.
The PS3 had the capability, but Xbox Live on the Xbox 360 was so much better than what Sony was offering. And on the flip side, the PS3 was the only one that had a Blu-ray player built in. Sony's games could fit on more data on their discs because they ran on Blu-rays.
Yeah.
And it was a determining factor on me buying a PS3 is that it could play Blu-ray movies as well.
Yeah.
And the console itself was more likely cheaper than an actual on-the-shelf Blu-ray player,
yeah.
which blows
Value
my
for money.
mind.
Totally, especially for the time. They've obviously gone down in price by now, but at the time they were cheaper. And considering that you could play games and use it for movies, it was definitely a bargain. But that said, I think out of those three, still my personal favorite from that generation is the Xbox 360.
Interesting.
Yeah, even though it technically didn't do as well, probably because it still doesn't sell well in Japan.
Yep.
But it is my favorite of the Xbox family. Even though I do have to change discs for a lot of the games that I play on that, like Mass Effect is always split on a couple of discs.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, there's just something about it. I love the controller. I love my special Star Wars edition of that. That's one of the ones we double dipped. We had the original Xbox 360 and then we got the special one, I think around tax time when I got my tax return one year.
It is interesting that Xbox trailed in third place by only a couple of million. And yet, again, Microsoft cannot penetrate the market in Japan.
Yeah.
So they must have done pretty darn well everywhere else to
Yes.
come that close to sniffing their opponents.
Totally. And, from Halo to Gears of War making its appearance, like they had some pretty solid titles themselves at that time.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really enjoyed the Xbox 360 as a console.
The
Very
Nintendo
cool.
Wii was kind of only pulled out when we had friends over, For
Yep.
me, if I'm going to sit down and play on my own, that's not usually what I gravitate towards first.
Yeah, Nintendo went back to their comfort zone of the technically or technologically inferior console, but it paid off. And you can see the trend when they try to invest in the heavy console, the powerful one, it doesn't quite do as well as when they throw out a cheapie that is harder to make games for, but apparently it works. It's very confusing. They are still, at this point in history, the unopposed leader of handheld units because the Nintendo DS was released in 2004, directly opposed by Sony's PlayStation Portable. However, in second place overall of all video game units, the Nintendo DS, 154 million units sold. And as we said, I bought one for myself and one for my future wife.
And they still make them today. They come under a mini umbrella. You've got the DS, the DS Lite and the DSi and so many other iterations of that kind of count under that bubble.
Yep.
Yeah, and because it was kind of had that flippy lid,
The flippy lid.
like a flip phone basically. It made it almost safer for traveling. You could protect those screens.
Yeah.
It was a good size to hold in your hand.
Didn't have to worry about your keys scratching the screen on your Game Boy
Yes.
in your pocket.
Granted, there were people who still managed to damage those things because they are terrible at looking after any of their stuff.
Yeah.
But another big deal was that it was also backwards compatible for Game Boy Advance games.
Which is always helpful because you can directly have, straight away, if you buy a new piece of hardware, you've already got a library of games to choose from. You may already own some games as well. But what I find so interesting about this head-to-head battle is that, sure, Nintendo blow their opposition out of the water, as they have for generations with their handheld games, with 154 million. But the Sony PlayStation Portable, 80 million of those were
Yes.
sold. That is baffling.
They are still used today in Japan. Sometimes, like, I mean, the Vita is popular over there more so than in the West, which is a travesty on our part. But
It's a travesty on Sony's part. Let's get it right.
But, you know, it's still popular, like, even up until, like, a few years ago. You look at dramas and anime, they show them still using the PlayStation Portable. Like, they hold on. Japan, even though they create modern technology, they tend to hold on to older technologies. A lot of businesses still use fax machines, you know. Like, when they get comfortable with something, they keep it.
The PlayStation Portable had miniature discs inside of a plastic case. The UMD was its device, and you could buy movies, which were on UMDs, and unfortunately, they did not survive the console generation jump because they were a one-and-done media type, which is why I'm so baffled at the fact that it sold 80 million units, because we never saw UMDs again.
Well, again, they're huge in Japan, and they had more longevity there. I think so much of the technology that you saw on the Portable and even on the Vita are things that we have on our mobile phones now that back then we didn't have. So you think about it launching in 2004, where we were using mostly flip phones. We didn't really have the touch screen technology and stuff. So at the time, it was revolutionary and it was lauded as, yes, this is the future of handheld gaming. This is where it's going. But
look
then
at the power on this machine.
Then the iPhone and other Androids start coming out and make it redundant.
You are 100% correct, because although we're going to go a bit out of time sequence here, if we talk about their direct next generation of handheld gaming, the Nintendo 3DS and the PlayStation Vita get nowhere near this amount of sales because iPhones, Androids, smartphones ruined gaming.
Mobile gaming, it is the reason the gaming industry makes so much money, but it's a bit of a stain as well.
The 3DS only did about half of the original DS's sales, to put that in comparison, and sold worse than the PS Portable, with 75 million at the moment, and the PlayStation Vita a whopping 15 million worldwide.
Aww. Well,
Poor
we
little Vita.
contributed to that.
Multiple times.
Yes, we even bought your mum one because we're like, here, we loaded it with a lot of her old favourite games, like Sly Cooper and stuff, and gave it to her. I don't know if she uses it, though.
The Vita itself was a misstep from the get-go because they had proprietary memory cards that you had to buy, the special Sony expensive memory cards, instead of just using an SD card, for example. I think that would have helped if they had let it be any generic memory card. That would have helped their business. They hurt themselves by being greedy. Yeah. They abandoned it quite early, gave it very little support. It is still beloved. If you love the Vita, you will find other people who love the Vita. I think 90% of my Twitter followers are just people who love the Vita.
Yes.
But I still think it's my favourite handheld of all time. I think it's among probably even my top 5 video game hardwares of all time. The PS Vita, I love it. And the 3DS, while it sold nowhere near as well as the original DS, I think is still quite good. And there's a lot of great titles on it as well.
Yep. And I think one of the reason it also sells really well is because they constantly release novelty ones of the 3DS and 2DS. I have a novelty 2DS, which is like a Pokeball. And I love it. You know, those are the kind of things that make me go, oh, now I have to buy that. Because I'm a sucker.
Well, I can't. If you're in a glass house, you can't throw stones. I think that's what they say. Before we get to the current generation of consoles, Nintendo did a Sega and released the Nintendo Wii U halfway through the development cycle, and it flopped horribly.
Yes, probably one of the biggest black marks on their history, I would say.
Well, we don't want to get into the Virtual Boy now, do we? The Nintendo Wii sales, for reference, was 101 million plus, okay? The Wii U, its sequel, but it was not advertised very well as such.
Yes.
13 million. Absolutely nowhere near. And as a result, that console died a quiet, unimpressive death. And to the point now where the Nintendo Switch has basically assimilated most of its library.
Pretty much.
So
thankfully, they do have a new life on that. But I think they learned a pretty hard lesson with the Wii U of, like, it was innovative, the tablet and stuff like that. It was kind of chunky and a little cheap looking.
Mm-hmm.
But the marketing did such a terrible job of making people realize that this is actually a different
console.
Yeah.
People didn't realize it. Mothers would go in and buy Wii U games expecting them to play on their Wii because it said Wii. And how is a U supposed to make it sound different? I still don't even know why they called it the Wii U.
A different name altogether.
Absolutely. It was a mess. It was hard to make games from developers.
Yep.
And it got no third-party support. It was a mess. It was terrible. It probably deserved to die. But there's still some enjoyable games on it.
Yes, like Luigi's Mansion, the mini games. We love them.
Nintendo Land.
Yes, the Nintendo Land mini games, the Luigi's Mansion one where you can play as a ghost. We still play that. It's one of the ones like friends will come over and be like, "Can we play that one?" We have to like dig it out of storage and blow the dust off.
In this 8th generation of video games that we are currently experiencing right now, the PlayStation 4, as we said this week, has crossed into second place of home console sales with over 102.8 million. Good on you, PS4. You are doing very well. And I think that is on the back of the incredible quality of the exclusive titles that have come out on the PS4.
Mm-hmm.
We have
So
been
many.
saying them for years now.
God of War, The Last of Us, Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man.
Death Stranding will be a
Yes.
console exclusive at this point at least, before it comes out on PC at least later. Now, last generation, the PS3 and Xbox 360 were neck and neck, but on this time around, the PS4 at 102 plus, Xbox One is at 46.9, less than half, and the Nintendo Switch not far behind at 41. Now, the problem for Microsoft, again, that darn Japanese market, they cannot get it. But secondly, the Xbox One, 46 million, Switch, 41, pretty close. They're doing well. They're beating them. Did I mention the Xbox One came out in 2013, the Switch in 2017? They had a 4-year head start and they're almost lost this race completely.
Well, I think they're kind of now focusing on what's coming next. So many of them, like we already had the PlayStation 5 announced, so we'll see what they're going to introduce and how they're going to innovate, because they're going to have to stay relevant as this gaming culture starts to shift towards mostly online streaming.
Yes.
So I'm really intrigued to see what is next and how they're going to combat that, I guess, to stay relevant.
As you said, who knows what Google Stadia will do to this with its whole no need to even buy a console. Is that going to sap the sales of actual hardware from other people?
Eventually, I'd say.
Well, it's very interesting. We've seen, without a shadow of a doubt, though, that the past 4 generations, no other company has had the success hardware-wise over the past 4 generations that Sony has had. Will that continue into the 5th? Will Microsoft get a second wind and take the console market? I highly doubt it, but stranger things have happened.
I hope that the Nintendo Switch, like obviously it's still quite young, but I hope to see it kind of get added to that top 10 list, because it is a great console.
It is.
Between it being also basically a portable one, like it's the best of both worlds. I wonder if they'll count the Switch Lite in those numbers now.
The Switch Lite, from my analysis, will be classified as a handheld only, which is what it is technically. But again, it's sort of cannibalizing from the Switch sales. So I don't know if that's exactly a good thing. It's hard to tell. But the future is interesting. Will Nintendo release another console too soon? That's my main concern, because now they're going to be behind the next generation of consoles again. Which is the danger that happens when you break the cycle.
Yep.
Will it pay off? I mean, the Switch I thought was going to not do as well, but I was right about the Wii U at least. I called that very early on the next Dreamcast, and I was right, and I'm sad about it.
Another interesting thing to note is that of recent years, Nintendo and Xbox have gotten pretty buddy-buddy to the point where you've got people from Nintendo recommending people go play something on an Xbox.
Why don't we just combine the companies and take down that big bad Sony? No, it's not going to happen.
No, but they are partnering up more and more, with a lot of crossplay. So it is interesting to see, and I wonder how that's going to change. And maybe that's a good way for Microsoft to change their perception in Japan and get that footing maybe that they've lost over the last couple of decades.
I don't know what they can do to get that Japanese market. I don't think it's possible for Microsoft. I don't know why they can't get it, but it's just maybe they're just too American. Maybe
possibly.
they're just not Japanese enough. I don't know. But overall, it has been their weakness.
But marketing, can change people's perceptions. And if they play it right, and I think partnering with Nintendo on stuff like they have been is a good first step in that area anyway. So I'm intrigued. There's so much changing at the moment. It's kind of fun to kind of watch and just sit there with a bowl of popcorn and enjoy the show.
And every time you think the console war has settled down into a 2-horse, 3-horse race, something weird happens. Sony's first console just obliterated everyone. Everyone laughed when Microsoft announced they were going to make a console, and it did very well. It's laid the foundation for near success next generation on. And now we have Google, of all people.
No one was laughing when they announced and threw their hat in the ring. We're all like, oh crap, what's Google going to do?
Don't ruin gaming. Don't ruin gaming, Google. Well, that's it. It's been an interesting analysis of the sales over the years, the ups and the downs and the all-arounds.
You can certainly see the trends. I think looking back with retrospect, you can see where companies have gone wrong. But now as we look forward, it's kind of hard to know who's going to make the smart decisions and who's going to shoot themselves in the foot, So I'm looking forward to it.
Come on, Sega, make a comeback. You can do it. I believe in you. Give me Jet Set Radio 3. That's all you need. Well, shall we move on to gaming goals?
Yes, let's. We'll be back with our future gaming goals after this.
Share the love. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaming Lovers.
Well, I am now clear of Spooky Month. My Resident Evil debt has been paid to society, and I am intending on playing a lot of The Outer Worlds.
Saw that one come in.
I'm so proud of myself for not saying The Outer Wilds once during this episode.
That's going to be the trend. When we do our best games of this year, you're going to be stumbling over both of those.
I'm going to be so confused. It's the one where you fly in space and you... Oh, hang on, that doesn't even help. Yeah. The Outer Worlds will be my primary game, my primary mobile, portable, handheld game, being Ys, Memories of Cell Cedar, on the PS Vita. I love you so much, PS Vita. I think I'm going to be pretty much locked into just those two titles for now, which, for me, is very monogamous because I share my love around my video games far too much.
Your polygamous relationship with gaming.
Spread myself too thin. 2 games are locked in for my gaming goals this
Call
week.
you the King Solomon of gaming.
Pretty much.
Oh dear.
So what are you going to play this week? Has The Outer Worlds baited you in?
I'm
enough
intrigued.
Yet?
I think I want to wait till you're close to end game before I start. So that way we're not fighting for time with the Xbox. I still haven't finished my second playthrough of Fire Emblem 3 Houses, and I would love to. I kind of haven't played that in a little bit. And I've also got Hakuoki Edo Blossoms. So that has definitely held my attention. So I'm happy to leave it at those 2 for now. I don't want to spread myself too thin trying to play everything. If I do pick up something else, then that's cool. We haven't played a co-op game in a while. Divinity has been
We got 90% of the way through Divinity and then just left it.
Yeah, we're good at that. We did that with Borderlands too. Oh dear. So we'll get around to it, I'm sure.
We need to finish some of these co-op games because I'm so scared that as the gaming lovers, our relationship is going to be 80 to 90% complete.
Oh no.
And then one of us we're just going to stop caring. So we need to do it. For the sake of our love, we must finish Divinity Original Sin at some point. But not now, because the Outer Worlds is too good to put down.
Oh my goodness.
Thanks for the company, everybody. We have had a great time looking back at video game sales. How many of them are your fault? And
Your fault. If you have a favourite console, it can be from the Atari right up into the Nintendo Switch. Let us know at thegaminglovers.com or on our Facebook or Twitter page. I think we've already kind of stated some of our favourites in this list as we've gone through.
yeah, I always seem to like the unappreciated weird ones.
Hashtag Vita Love. Until next week.
Or 7 days from now. Either way. Chowski.
Bye, Nara.
Thanks for listening to the Gaming Lovers podcast. For more episodes or to watch some live stream gaming, visit thegaminglovers.com.